The cemetery was nearly empty, the only sounds the rhythmic patter of rain against marble and the occasional rustle of leaves in the cold wind. The billionaire knelt beside the fresh mound of earth, his expensive shoes sinking slightly into the mud, the black fabric of his suit soaked and clinging to his skin. He pressed a trembling hand to the cold soil, as if by sheer touch he could pull her back into his arms. The bouquet of white lilies in his other hand drooped under the rain, petals bruised and delicate, but he barely noticed. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were red-rimmed, glassy with unshed tears. "Why did you leave me?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why did this happen to you, to us?" He couldn't bear the silence, the emptiness that echoed in the space where her laughter once had. Every corner of his life seemed suddenly hollow. The mansion they had built together felt unbearably large, the echoes of her absence bouncing off gilded walls, mocking him. In his mind, he saw her smile, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the soft lilt of her voice calling his name. Each memory was a knife twisting deeper into his chest. He bowed forward, resting his forehead against the damp earth, and let the tears fall freely. Rain mixed with his grief, streaming down his cheeks in streaks that no handkerchief could wipe away. Passers-by in the distance glanced briefly at the lone figure, but no one approached. They couldn't understand the magnitude of what he had lost. He was a man who commanded empires, who dictated the fates of hundreds, yet here, kneeling in mud and rain, he was powerless. Unseen, a figure lingered behind a row of towering oaks. She watched him, alive, breathing, hidden. Her heart clenched at the sight of him so raw, so utterly devastated. The love in his gaze, though directed at a grave, was unmistakable. Every shudder of his body, every whispered plea, spoke to her in ways words could not. She wanted to run forward, to reveal herself, to ease the agony etched into his expression, but something held her back. Timing, safety, circumstances, all had forced her into the shadows. He straightened slightly, clutching the lilies as if holding onto them could anchor him to reality. "I can't do this without you," he murmured, voice low but fierce. "I can't live in a world where you're gone." The rain intensified, drenching him, but he didn't move. He was lost in the storm of his grief, unaware that she stood mere feet away, watching, aching, and silently promising that one day, the truth would come, and their reunion would be worth every second of this torment. She stayed hidden behind the thick trunks of the ancient oaks, rain soaking her hair and clothes, but she didn't care. Every fiber of her being ached at the sight of him, her husband, the man she had loved more than life itself, kneeling in despair over a grave that was supposed to hold her. Her presence here was a secret, a painful twist of fate. She had been forced into hiding after threats she couldn't yet disclose, but seeing him like this made her heart shatter anew. He didn't notice her. His eyes, red and swollen, were fixed on the wet earth, as though willing it to yield answers. The sorrow emanating from him was almost tangible, a heavy weight pressing down even through the distance between them. She wanted to reach him, to throw herself into his arms and tell him everything, but she restrained herself. She had to be careful. Too soon, and it could jeopardize not only her safety but theirs. The world around them was still dangerous, unpredictable, and cruel. Memories flooded her mind as she watched him. The first time they had met at a gala, how he had nervously brushed a strand of hair from her face, the laughter-filled nights they had spent sharing dreams and fears, the quiet mornings sipping coffee on their balcony as the city woke beneath them. She remembered the way he held her hand during thunderstorms, promising that nothing could ever separate them. And now, seeing him kneel in grief, the magnitude of the loss he believed he had suffered made her heart break in ways she hadn't anticipated. A flash of anger surged briefly, anger at the lies, the manipulations that had forced her into this cruel charade, anger at the world for making her helpless while he suffered, but it was quickly replaced by sorrow. She had to be patient. She had to wait for the perfect moment to reveal herself, a moment that would not only reunite them but also heal the months of anguish. She wiped a tear from her cheek, rain mingling with it, and whispered to herself, "Hold on. Just a little longer. I'm here, I've always been here." Her voice was lost in the storm, but her words were meant for him, carried by her resolve. She would come back into his life, but carefully, deliberately. When the time was right, he would know the truth, not from rumors or whispers, but from her own voice, and the shock, the relief, the joy, and the love would be overwhelming. For now, she remained in the shadows, watching him, protecting him, mourning alongside him, and silently promising that the day they were reunited would be worth every second of the torment this separation had caused. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the cemetery slick and glistening, as though the entire world had been washed clean of color and sound. He remained kneeling at the grave, exhausted and soaked, but something in the air shifted. A faint rustle among the trees made him look up, instinctively, though his mind tried to convince him it was just the wind. Yet the movement had a rhythm, a familiarity he couldn't place, a presence that stirred memories deep in his subconscious. He stood slowly, clutching the bouquet of wilted lilies, and glanced around the deserted cemetery. The shadows cast by the overcast sky seemed to bend unnaturally, almost like someone was watching him. His heart began to race, a strange mixture of hope and fear twisting inside his chest. Could it really be? No. He had buried her. He had accepted it, even as his soul screamed against the impossibility. And yet, there was something that made him shiver despite the damp cold. He took a hesitant step forward, scanning the edges of the oaks, the stone paths, the mist hovering above the freshly dug earth. A soft sigh reached his ears, faint and almost ghost-like. His breath caught. Is someone there? He asked, voice shaking. The words sounded absurd, even to him, but they carried a desperate hope he had not dared to feel in months. He wanted to believe, but fear held him back, the fear that his mind was betraying him with cruel illusions. From behind the trees, she stepped just slightly, careful not to reveal herself fully. Her eyes locked on him, filled with the same love, pain, and longing that he had carried in her absence. She made no sound, but her gaze was enough to make his pulse accelerate. He could almost feel her there, like a brush of warmth in the cold, like the echo of a heartbeat against his own. His hands trembled as he let the lilies fall to the ground, rain-soaked petals scattering at his feet. He whispered her name, barely daring to believe that sound could reach her. Clara. His voice cracked. The syllable hung in the mist, fragile, tentative, yet charged with a lifetime of emotion. And for the first time since her disappearance, he felt the raw edge of hope, fragile, but insistent. Something told him he was no longer alone, that she was here, somewhere, and that he might not have to endure this grief forever. He stepped forward cautiously, senses sharpened, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The possibility of seeing her, of reaching her, felt overwhelming. And though he could not yet see her fully, he knew, deep down, that the story of their love was about to shift, forever. He moved cautiously, each step measured, as if the ground itself might betray him. The mist hung low, curling around the tombstones like a shroud, and yet in the distance, he saw a figure, small at first, almost blending with the shadows. His breath hitched. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The figure was unmistakable. The silhouette, the way she held herself, the gentle curve of her hair falling across her shoulders, it was her. Alive. Clara. His voice trembled, barely more than a whisper, but it carried across the wet grass, raw with disbelief and longing. His knees buckled slightly, but he held himself up, arms reaching out instinctively. The world had shrunk to the space between them, a tension of hope and fear that made time feel elastic. Every second stretched, each heartbeat echoing like thunder. She stepped forward, rain glistening on her hair, eyes shining with tears. A fragile smile broke through her own sorrow. "It's me," she said softly, voice catching, trembling with relief. "I'm here, I never left." The words, simple and impossibly beautiful, sent a shiver down his spine. It was real. She was really here, alive. He closed the distance in 2 long strides, and when their eyes met, it was as though the months of torment, the endless grief, and the unbearable loneliness dissolved in an instant. He took her face in his hands, memorizing every line, every contour, as if afraid it might vanish. She leaned into him, hands clutching his jacket, tears mixing with rain, and he held her as if letting go would mean losing her again. "I thought I'd lost you forever," he whispered, voice breaking, fingers trembling. "I don't know how I survived without you." She pressed her forehead to his, breath mingling with his, her heartbeat steady against his chest. "You didn't lose me," she murmured. "I've always been here, watching, waiting, and now, we can start again." For a long moment, they simply clung to each other, the storm around them fading into a gentle drizzle, the mist lifting as if giving way to a new beginning. The world outside the cemetery ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them in a fragile, perfect bubble of reunion. He laughed softly, tears streaming, a sound of joy and relief that surprised even him. "You're really here," he said, almost in disbelief, as he pulled her close again. She smiled through her tears, nodding, whispering, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The grave that had once been a symbol of despair now seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the living proof of their love. Rain washed over them, cold and cleansing, but inside their embrace, warmth, forgiveness, and hope bloomed. At last, they were together, and nothing could ever take that away.